Keith sat slouched in his seat at Banged 'Em High, tapping out an erratic rhythm with his pencil. It wasn't just tapping, he was creating patterns in his mind, visualizing the pencil's clicks as a dance of energy waves. His blonde hair, constantly tousled like he'd run through a windstorm, fell into his sharp green eyes that twinkled with an intelligence most missed. Keith wasn't the standard issue high schooler. His mind worked differently. His ADHD had him leaping between thoughts, while his autism brought intense focus to small details most others missed. Both conditions combined in ways that granted him a unique outlook on the world, real or virtual. The classroom was a strange mix of futuristic holographic displays and the same old quantum physics lectures that could put anyone to sleep. But Keith's attention wasn't there. His mind had drifted far from the dim blue glow of the holoboard. The outside world was more inviting, the shimmering state forest bordering the school drawing his eye. It swayed, almost beckoning him, though the real pull was from another place entirely, the Infiniverse. Recently, he had experienced some unforgettable moments there with his close friend Adel Ram, a user from the planet Katana. Klic recalled the day they ventured together through the lush, bioluminescent forests of Druidia, where trees glowed in shades of blue and purple, casting an otherworldly light over everything. The air had been cool and fresh, filled with the scent of wildflowers, and their laughter echoed as they raced each other down a winding path, their footsteps barely making a sound on the soft forest floor. They had come across a hidden waterfall, its waters sparkling like liquid crystal in the Infiniverse's light. There, Adel Ram had shown Klic how to manipulate the energy of the Infiniverse to create a bridge of light, a trick he had mastered on Katana. The bridge arched over the waterfall, shimmering and translucent, leading them to a hidden grove where they could sit and watch the water cascade down into a glowing pool. The memory of the gentle hum of the waterfall, the feeling of Adel Ram's friendly shoulder bump, and the shared sense of wonder made Klic smile even now, miles away from the Infiniverse. Keith's eyes unfocused, drifting back to a recent battle they had fought side by side. They had faced off against a rogue AI that had corrupted a sector of the Infiniverse, turning it into a chaotic maze of shifting pathways and deceptive illusions. Klic and Adel Ram had navigated the maze, their bond and mutual trust guiding them through the confusion. Klic remembered the rush of adrenaline as he had leapt over a collapsing bridge, Adel Ram's hand reaching out to pull him to safety at the last moment. The thrill of victory they had felt when the AI was finally neutralized, its code dissolving into harmless particles, had been one of the most exhilarating moments of Klic's life. The vivid memories of his adventures with Adel Ram in the Infiniverse made Keith long to escape his current reality, where the ache of his mother's absence loomed over him. The secondary reality was the only place where he could find the kind of companionship that crossed the boundaries of species and planets, where a boy from Earth and a warrior from Katana could be the best of friends.
Earth to Keith.
The teacher's voice cut through his thoughts, snapping him back to the classroom. Mrs. Nolan, a woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun and glasses perched on the edge of her nose, usually an easygoing teacher but always tried to show her authority, glared at him from the front of the room, hands on her hips.
Care to join us in this discussion about quantum entanglement, or are you too busy composing your next symphony?
A few students chuckled, but Klic just grinned, shrugging lazily.
Just thinking about how to entangle my way out of this class,
he said, eliciting more laughter. Mrs. Nolan rolled her eyes but couldn't help the slight twitch of a smile. Klic was known for his pranks. He loved the thrill of mischief, the way it broke the monotony of school life. His best friend Dan, sitting behind him, always had his back. Dan was tall and athletic, with curly black hair and a perpetual smirk that matched Klic's own. His hazel eyes were sharp and constantly flickering with curiosity, always looking for the next opportunity to join in Klic's schemes. They were more than friends. They were partners in crime, understanding each other without words. He slipped his hand into his pocket, feeling the smooth, cool surface of his latest gadget, a mini projection device he'd tinkered with to project holograms remotely. He'd been waiting for the right moment to use it. Leaning slightly back, he whispered to Dan, his best friend, sitting behind him.
watch this.
Dan's eyes lit up, his smirk widening.
Oh, this is going to be good,
he muttered under his breath, leaning forward in anticipation. A second later, a lifelike holographic spider crawled up the aisle, heading straight for Mrs. Nolan's desk. It moved with the realism of a military drone, its metal legs clinking softly against the floor. The classroom erupted in shrieks as the spider scurried right under Mrs. Nolan's desk. She jumped back, eyes wide, swatting at the air in panic. Klic and Dan burst into laughter, unable to contain themselves.
Keith!
Mrs. Nolan shouted, assuming who the culprit was from his reputation around school. But even she had to admit, Klic's pranks were never malicious, just creative and always harmless. The students' laughter filled the room, lightening the mood. But as the laughter died down, a low hum filled the room, almost like the sound of distant machinery. Klic's smile faded. His ADHD-tuned senses picked up on the change before anyone else. It wasn't the usual hum of the school's systems. This was deeper, more resonant. The fluorescent lights flickered, and then the emergency alarm blared, making everyone jump. A stern robotic voice came over the loudspeakers. Warning, neural security breach detected. All students remain seated. Emergency protocols initiated. A cold knot formed in Klic's stomach. Neural security breach? That wasn't possible. His eyes met Dan's across the room, both of them understanding the implication immediately. This was no ordinary school drill. Klic's mind raced. He knew the school's neural network was connected to the Infiniverse, allowing students to access virtual reality learning. But if someone had breached it? Around him, students exchanged nervous glances, the laughter from minutes earlier forgotten. Klic's girlfriend Jennifer caught his eye from 2 rows over. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her blue eyes, usually so full of life and warmth, now reflected worry. Her cheeks were flushed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She was beautiful, Klic thought, even when she was worried. Especially when she was worried. Her concern showed just how much she cared, and that made his heart swell, even in the midst of fear. They had only been dating for a few months, but the connection was instant. Jennifer knew Klic in a way no one else did. Her face was calm, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers drummed against her desk. Jennifer was one of the few people who knew Klic's secret, that in the Infiniverse he wasn't just Keith. Sarah, the girl who sat next to Klic, looked pale, her hands trembling.
What does it mean, Keith? Is it like a hacker or something?
Keith forced a smile, though his insides churned with worry.
Probably just a glitch, nothing to freak out about.
But he knew better. If the neural network was compromised, it could mean that someone had activated the war mode from the Infiniverse, and that meant real-world danger. Keith's mind raced through possibilities. He was just a scrawny little kid in the real world, and would be no defense against any threat here, but if he could stop it in the Infiniverse, he could save his friends and classmates. He needed to get into the Infiniverse, find out what was happening, and fast. He leaned back toward Dan, speaking under his breath.
I need you to create a distraction.
Dan nodded without question. They'd pulled off enough pranks together that he trusted Klic's instincts. Dan slipped his hand into his pocket, pulling out a tiny device, a modified taser set to a low, harmless setting. He gave Klic a wink and with a sudden jolt, threw himself to the floor, twitching and convulsing. Pandemonium erupted. Mrs. Nolan rushed to Dan's side, her voice rising above the noise.
Someone get the nurse!
Taking advantage of the chaos, Klic and Jennifer slipped out of the room, moving quickly down the hall to an unused classroom. Klic's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the urgency of the situation. They locked the door behind them, Jennifer setting her Infiniverse entry device on the desk. She was not exactly the superhero Klic was in the Infiniverse, but there was no safer place in the secondary reality than by his side. He wouldn't let anything happen to her, but even that comfort wasn't enough to put her at total ease if the war mode had truly been activated. Death would now be possibly in both realities if it was true, but she would stand by her man no matter the circumstances. He wouldn't let him go alone, not when she knew the risks. The idea of facing danger scared her, but the thought of Klic facing it alone terrified her more. She reached out, touching his hand, her fingers cool and steady.
We'll get through this, Klic, together.
Klic nodded, squeezing her hand. He couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for her. She was his anchor, his support. He wouldn't let anything happen to her. He couldn't. The familiar sensation of being pulled from one reality to another washed over them. The colors of the real world faded, replaced by the vibrant, surreal hues of the Infiniverse. Here, everything was amplified sights, sounds, even emotions. The air smelled like fresh rain, mingling with the scent of wildflowers that didn't exist in the real world. Klic took a deep breath, his senses heightening as he transformed into his Infiniverse self taller, stronger, clad in the sleek, glowing armor that marked him as a defender of this realm. His armor was black with neon green lines that pulsed with energy, his cape flowing like liquid light. Jennifer stood beside him, her own avatar shining with a soft, ethereal light. Her armor was silver, with delicate blue lines that matched her eyes, her hair cascading in waves around her shoulders. A deep, gut-wrenching scream pierced the air. Keith's heart pounded as he gripped Jennifer's hand tighter, his senses screaming that something was horribly wrong. This wasn't the Infiniverse he knew. Something terrible had happened. In the distance, figures moved. At first, they appeared to be normal Avatars players from different planets navigating the vast landscape. But as they got closer, Keith saw the truth. These weren't people, they were shells, their bodies twisted and malformed. Their faces were frozen in expressions of terror, mouths open in silent screams, as their flesh burned with a sickening glow. Some were crawling, dragging half-melted limbs behind them. Others stood motionless, their eyes glowing like dead stars. Jennifer gasped beside him, her hand trembling in his.
What is this?
Keith's throat tightened as he forced the words out.
It's war mode. But this is beyond anything I've ever seen.
Suddenly, the twisted figures parted, revealing a single figure standing at the center of the destruction. It was Adel Ram, but not as Keith remembered him. Gone was the familiar laughing friend from the lush forests of Druidia. Now Adel Ram stood taller, his once pristine armor now a mass of blackened spikes, glowing with fiery red runes that pulsed like a beating heart. His skin was ashen gray, eyes blazing with a malevolent red light, and his mouth curled into a sneer that sent chills down Keith's spine. His presence here was a betrayal Klic still hadn't come to terms with.
Well, if it isn't the Golden Boy, come to save the day, Klic. Or maybe you're just here to watch the real world burn. The mighty Klic, hero of the Infiniverse. I hope you're ready to watch everything you love burn.
Adel Ram! What have you done?
Done? Oh, Klic, this is only the beginning.
He extended his hand, and the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing rivers of molten lava. The earth shook violently as towers of flame erupted around them, like the very world itself was tearing apart. Keith's heart raced. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was destruction on a galactic scale.
What are you doing? You were one of us.
One of you? I was never treated that way. I saw the truth long before any of you fools, of not just my powers, but of the Infiniverse. The Infiniverse is power, and I plan to use it. This little school breach is just the beginning. Soon, war mode will be everywhere, and there won't be a place you can hide.
Adel Ram raised his hands, and the storm above swirled more violently. Lightning danced between his fingers, growing brighter until the entire sky seemed to pulse with electricity. Klic's instincts screamed at him to act, but before he could move, the ground beneath him shifted. Adel Ram stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Keith with a gaze that felt like it could burn a hole through him. Did you really think the Infiniverse was just some playground? Some utopia where you could be the hero and save the day? You have no idea of the power this world holds, and now, neither will anyone else. Keith tried to move, tried to reach for Jennifer, but his feet felt rooted to the ground as the air around him grew thick with heat and smoke. Adel Ram raised his arms, and suddenly the sky split open. From the tear in the sky came a flood of dark energy, a void that swallowed everything in its path. Stars, planets, and galaxies' whole worlds were sucked into the swirling black mass, their light snuffed out in an instant. Jennifer screamed as she was pulled toward the void, her body trembling with fear. Keith grabbed her hand, holding on for dear life, but the force was too strong. The ground around them cracked and crumbled, leaving them teetering on the edge of oblivion.
Poor cocky Klic. You still think you are the only neurodivergent with special powers. Everything you know is about to change. You see, Klic, the Infiniverse isn't just a game. It's life and death. And now, it's the end.
With a flick of his wrist, Adel Ram unleashed a torrent of energy that slammed into Keith and Jennifer, sending them flying. Keith's body slammed into the ground, the wind knocked out of him as he struggled to breathe. He looked up just in time to see Jennifer's form hurtling toward the void.
No!
Keith screamed. scrambling to his feet. He reached out, but it was too late. Jennifer's figure was swallowed by the dark energy, her scream echoing in his ears as she disappeared into the void. Keith fell to his knees, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on him like a tidal wave. His best friend, the girl he loved gone, lost to the darkness. And standing over him, laughing, was Adel Ram.
Now, watch as everything you care about burns.
Keith's world collapsed around him. The Infiniverse, his sanctuary, his second home, was no longer a place of wonder. It was a graveyard, and Adel Ram had just set the first match. Klic felt the ground shift beneath his feet, a sudden, jarring sensation as he was pulled back to reality. He blinked, disoriented, finding himself once again in the real-world classroom. But something was wrong. Jennifer and Dan was no longer there, and the room was silent, too silent. His classmates were all frozen, their eyes wide, Neuralink devices clamped to their necks, the same emergency warning flashing across each interface. War mode activated, unauthorized entry detected. Panic surged through Klic as he realized what this meant. Someone was controlling his entire class, dragging them into the Infiniverse against their will. He was the only one left who could stop it. Klic's voice was barely a whisper, his heart hammering in his chest. Klic's hands shook as he reached for his Neuralink, knowing that the fight for both worlds was just beginning, and this time, the cost of failure was real.